I will introduce the players. Mr. Penny is the prosecuting attorney, and Mr. Lewis, played by John Jackson, is the defense attorney. Dr. Minter, who's Dr. Minter, is a doctor who attended the president, and Mr. Rice is Ralph Walton, and he's chairman of the President's Day at the Pan American Exhibition. Mr. Babcock is Grand Marshal of Ceremonies at the Pan American Exhibition. Mr. Branch is custodian at the Hall of Music, which is where the event occurred. And Superintendent Bull is Don Greenhouse, and he is Buffalo Chief of Police. The prisoner is Leon Czolgosz, and played by Kathleen Johnson. She's over there in her prison uniform. And foreman of the jury is Betsy Miller, whom you will meet at the end of the event. Mr. District Attorney, have you any business for the court?
I desire to arraign the prisoner, Leon Czolgosz, Your Honor. Mr. Czolgosz, you have been indicted on the charge of murder in the first degree, in that on September 6, 1901, you unlawfully killed one William McKinley, contrary to law. How do you plead?
Guilty.
That plea cannot be accepted in this court. The clerk will enter a plea of not guilty, and we will proceed with the trial.
Judge, this defendant appeared in the county court last week, and at that time Judge Emery assigned as his counsel the Honorable Lauren Lewis to attend to the case and ascertain the rights that this man had and to put in such defense as he deemed best.
If the court please, it has been thought best that something should be said, not in a way of apology, but as a reason why I am here in defense of this defendant. I at first declined absolutely to take part in the defense of the case, but subsequently it was made to appear that it was a duty which I owed alike to our profession, to the public, and to the court, that I accept this assignment. Unpleasant though the task is, and therefore appear in accordance with that assignment to see that this defendant, if he is guilty, is convicted only by such evidence as the law of the land requires in a case of this character, and that in the trial of this case the forms of law shall be observed, and that no act and no bit of evidence shall be introduced against this defendant unless it is such as would be accepted upon the trial of the meanest criminal in the smallest case.
It certainly accords with the views of this court that gentlemen like yourself should have been appointed to the county court to defend this prisoner.
May it please the court and gentlemen of the jury, this defendant before you is charged with having committed the crime of murder in the first degree in the city of Buffalo on the 6th day of September of this year. It is alleged that upon that day he committed an assault upon William McKinley, and that with a revolver and firearm in his hands, he fired upon William McKinley, inflicting upon him a mortal wound. That the said William McKinley languished from the 6th day of September until the 14th day of September, upon which he died from the mortal wound inflicted by this defendant. The main facts of this case will be presented to you by eyewitnesses, by people who were there at the time and saw the commission of this crime, by those who apprehended the defendant and who disarmed him at the time. This is, in brief, gentlemen, the case of the people, and I have no doubt that when the evidence is presented to you, you will not find much difficulty in arriving at a verdict in accordance with the evidence.
Yes.
Just as an aside, we acknowledge the testimony of Dr. Gaylord, who presented evidence that the president was in reasonable health for a man of his age, and that the cause of death was by a bullet wound. I now call upon another physician, Dr. Minter, to provide further information. Dr. Minter. Dr. Minter, you are a physician and surgeon.
I am.
Were you called on the day of the shooting of the president to attend to him?
I was.
Doctor, were there a number of surgeons and physicians who united in the treatment of the president in consulting?
Yes, several.
Where did you find the president?
I found him on the table in the operating room.
Will you tell us as briefly as you can what you found and what you did?
I found a bullet wound in the upper part and left part of the abdominal cavity. He was not temperate. He was slightly under the influence of opium. I told the president that an operation was indicated at once to save his life, and he acquiesced. I made preparations immediately, with the assistance of the other gentlemen present, for a laparotomy.
What is that, doctor?
The operation of opening the abdominal cavity. The operation is called laparotomy. We agreed to wait for Dr. Mann when we were told that he was on his way, I being the only surgeon present at the time. When Dr. Mann arrived, I told him that an operation was necessary at once. He examined the president, told him the same, and we proceeded at once with the operation. The abdomen was opened in the line of the incision. As soon as it was opened, air escaped, showing that there was a perforation of one of the hollow viscous organs. On account of the stoutness of the president, it was difficult to get at the posterior wound in the stomach, which we judged to be present. With great difficulty, we found it. That was somewhat larger and fused with blood, and we sutured that. After we had done that, Dr. Mann introduced his whole hand and tried to locate the forward course of the bullet. It showed itself to be impossible. The president's pulse was getting higher, and it was time to close and finish the operation. We therefore washed out the abdominal cavity with sterilized salt solution and cleaned everything.
Then what happened, doctor?
At that time, Dr. Park arrived from Niagara Falls. Dr. Mann asked him and the others present if they had any further suggestions to make in regard to the treatment of the president. We all declared ourselves satisfied. We closed the wound with sutures and applied bandages. The president's condition after the operation was finished was fair. He was removed immediately, before he was out of the influence of ether, to Mr. Milburn's house. There was a discussion whether he should be removed, and it was decided by a majority that he ought to be removed to that house, as he partly was under the influence of ether now and would not know it and would not feel it and would not be injured. And as there was no preparation in the hospital made for patients to stay overnight, I helped to carry him up and put him in bed. That is the history of the operation.
Then you continued as one of the associates in attendance with him?
I continued as one of the associates and attending surgeons on the president. For the first 2 days, it was a time of great anxiety for all of us, as we imagined and feared that inflammation of the bowels might occur from the gunshot wound. 2 days passed, and the president, instead of getting worse, held his own and was improving. For the next 2 days, it was a period of great hope for us. We thought that the peritonitis, inflammation of the bowels, was not apt to occur. As 2 days already had passed and no complications occurred, we had strong hopes at that time that the president might recover. The president was evidently getting better. He was eating some food. His pulse, although it kept high, was of good volume. He had absolutely no symptoms of peritonitis, no symptoms of sepsis or any other serious trouble. And as 6 days almost had passed, surgeons would say that in the majority of cases they would get well.
Doctor, I do not care for all that detail. I want to know that you attended generally through the consultation.
Yes, sir.
You opened the wound after a number of days, did you?
We only opened the outer wound.
You opened it sufficiently to look into the first wound?
Oh, no, no.
To the stomach?
Oh, no. Only sufficient to open the incision in the skin, in the subcutaneous tissue, down to the muscles of the abdominal wall. It was an infected wound, and by opening it and letting the fluids escape and disinfecting it, we probably checked the whole process there.
What caused the infection?
I wish you could tell me.
Well, I ask you.
Well, I don't know. The bacteriological examination perhaps may show you, but that's not finished.
But you were being asked questions here, doctor. As an expert?
Yes, but there are things I don't know.
Well, then, you will very kindly say so. I'm not criticizing you.
I beg your pardon. I do not mean so.
I'm not criticizing you, sir. I just want you to answer my question.
Yes.
At the present time, in cases of these operations on wounds, you use antiseptics?
Yes, sir.
And could that have been applied to the pancreas?
No, sir. That could not have produced these changes in the pancreas.
How?
You mean, could that have produced these changes in the pancreas?
Could it have been applied to that organ, and would it have a tendency to prevent the gangrene?
No, I do not believe that. I do not believe that an antiseptic in itself could have prevented this destruction of the tissue.
What could? What is there known to medical science that would have probably arrested the progress of the wound?
I don't know of anything.
You do not know of anything?
No, sir.
Well, the office of this remedy which you use, antiseptic, is it to arrest the progress of such an injury?
No, it is to prevent the invasion of the tissues by microorganisms.
How is that?
It is prevent the infection of the wound by microorganisms, by bacteria.
Is it simply to eradicate this creature we hear so much about, the bacteria?
Yes, sir.
Is it to arrest inflammation?
No, sir. Antiseptic is simply to prevent the invasion of the tissues by bacteria.
When a person is wounded, the natural result is a fever, is it?
That is when the individual becomes infected by organisms.
Such inflammation follows?
As a result of infection, yes, sir.
Yes, and then you use this antiseptic to prevent inflammation.
It is used at the time of the interference or the operation to prevent it, and it's used afterwards to destroy organisms that are already there.
Is it or is it not used, doctor, to prevent inflammation?
No, sir. Antiseptics are not used to prevent inflammation as such.
So that the popular notion that it is used to prevent the progress of inflammation is all an error?
Inflammation is not always due to bacteria.
Leaving out bacteria entirely?
Yes, sir. That is an error. Antiseptics are not used to prevent inflammation.
They have no relation to the inflammation?
They have, in that sense, no relation to inflammation.
Well, in any sense.
Antiseptics are...
Well, I say in any sense. The answer is yes or no to that.
The question is too broad. I cannot possibly answer it yes or no.
My question is whether it does in any way or is used for the purpose of preventing inflammation. I do not care what stage or process is passed through. It is ultimately that the object of it to prevent inflammation.
Yes, roughly put.
Well, I wanted to know for my own information, somewhat because I have been laboring under that impression. Did I understand you to say that you found cancerous germs?
That I found what, sir?
Cancerous germs?
No, sir.
That is all, Doctor.
Just a minute, Dr. Mentor. Do you care to make an explanation as to the question asked you as to the relation between antiseptics and inflammation?
Well, inflammation is a popular term which is applied to a large group of changes and can be produced in other ways than by that which follows infection. That was the reason I was unable to answer the gentleman's question. Antiseptics are applied to prevent that form, or not necessarily that form of inflammation, but those changes in the tissue which are brought about by the entry of organisms into the tissue. There are other things besides inflammation which it is used to prevent also.
I think that is all, Doctor.
Mr. Babcock, you are an attorney and counselor at law.
I am.
On the occasion of the President's visit here to Buffalo and the Pan American, were you the Grand Marshal of the ceremonies at the Pan American?
I was.
Were you present in the Temple of Music on the occasion of the shooting?
I was.
Were the people that were approaching the President already arranged in single files where you were standing?
Yes, sir.
Go on and tell what you saw from that point.
I heard two shots, which came very close together. And I immediately turned around towards the left and glanced and saw the President standing. He was standing perfectly still, and he was deathly pale. Right in the range of my vision was a group closing in upon and bearing down to the floor the prisoner, the defendant here.
Describe what else you saw.
Well, these artillerymen from the regular army centered upon the prisoner from all sides, and almost quicker than I can describe it, bore him down to the ground, down to the floor, had him on the floor. They had hold of his coat, his arms, and his legs. I should say there were 8 or 10 men on top of him. Almost immediately I saw one man, whom I do not know, grab a revolver as the prisoner was going down, appeared to take it away from him. And just as soon as the prisoner was down on the ground, I ran towards the east and motioned to the guards, "Everybody out!" The guards immediately cleared the Temple of Music.
This man that was borne to the floor was taken where from that point?
He was then on his feet, surrounded by the artillerymen and Secret Servicemen, Officers Foster and Ireland, and one or two exposition guards, and I think some of the Buffalo City detectives. They were there in the temple. There, a controversy immediately arose as to who was entitled to the custody of the prisoner. That was very soon settled, and then the prisoner was taken by 3 or 4 of the officers in plain clothes, in citizens' clothes, towards Mr. Henshaw's office in the Temple of Music.
The man that you saw taken in there was the same man that was under the soldiers that did the shooting?
Yes, sir.
Was it this defendant here?
Yes, sir.
Mr. Rice, you were chairman of this committee on ceremonies to arrange for the details of the entertainment of the president.
Yes, sir. I was chairman. It's the President's Day.
Were you in the Temple of Music on the occasion of the shooting?
I was.
Where were you at the time of the shooting?
I stood directly opposite the President.
Mr. Rice, go on and tell what you saw in reference to the shooting.
I noticed the President's hand go forward to shake hands with the next person in line. I immediately noticed a line of white pushed toward the President, and 1 or 2 quick reports, so quick you could hardly distinguish one from the other. The thought in my mind was that someone had concealed a revolver in a newspaper. I immediately looked towards the President and saw him straighten up. He was standing directly before him and facing him, the defendant. Immediately after, the artillerymen who had been stationed on the left of the President lunged towards the defendant. And at the same instant of time, Mr. Geller, the Secret Service operator, who had been standing at the right of the President, a little to his rear, plunged forward in an easterly direction. And practically about the same time, these men caught the defendant. I saw for an instant just a glimpse of something white as Gallagher lunged towards him. The artillerymen, who were stationed directly opposite the President and Foster and Ireland of the Secret Service, at the same time lunged toward those who were struggling and swaying. The defendant went to the floor, and on top of him went a number of the artillerymen. It seemed to me as though the entire mass went down in a heap on the defendant. Then the defendant came up, standing in the grasp of several of these men. He was then struck a blow by W. Foster, which sent him to the floor again, and he went down, and he bled somewhat from the face. He was then taken to the room of Mr. Henshaw. In the meantime, the President had been assisted by Mr. Geary and Mr. Milburn. The President was seated, and some gentlemen fanned him until the ambulance belonging to the emergency hospital at the exposition came. A litter was brought in. The President was placed upon the litter and moved to the ambulance.
After the prisoner had been taken away and sometime after the statements had been taken from the artillerymen, did you accompany me to headquarters?
I did.
Did you there see the prisoner?
I did.
Did he there make any statement in your presence with reference to his part in the crime?
He did.
Did he there make any statements? Were there any threats or inducements there made or offered to him, so far as you know?
None.
Whatever he said appeared to be voluntary?
Entirely so.
Will you tell what he said with reference to his part in this transaction?
The witnesses said that there were no threats made, but I suggested if he is to tell what occurred there, that he commence and tell everything that preceded that statement.
Yes, he'd better describe the occurrence fully.
Go on in that way.
I accompanied you, Mr. District Attorney Penny, from the Temple of Music to police headquarters. We arrived at police headquarters between 10 and 11 o'clock. The time before that had been consumed in the Temple of Music and taking the measurements, photographs, and statements of witnesses.
That night?
The night of the shooting, yes, sir. Upon reaching police headquarters, the district attorney and I went to the office of Superintendent of Police Bull. The defendant was seated at the table in his inner office. There were present about 10 other official people. When we entered the room, Mr. Penny proceeded to talk with the defendant about what he had done. I know nothing of what took place before that time.
Tell what you saw and heard yourself.
Then the defendant replied to questions by the district attorney, stated that he had killed the president because he believed that it was his duty. He stated that he understood the consequences and was willing to take his chances. He described in detail the conversation over about 2 hours, his movements during the day of the shooting and for some time previous. He himself, with a handkerchief which he had showed how he concealed his revolver and how he fired the shots. He stated that he had gone to Niagara Falls on the morning of the day of the shooting with the intention of shooting the president at the falls, but that he was unable to carry out his purpose there, not being able to get near enough to the president. That he took a streetcar from Niagara Falls to Buffalo, transferred to a car going to the exposition grounds, and went to the Temple of Music with the purpose of shooting the president. He said he waited outside in the line. He had placed his revolver in his right hand, covered it with his handkerchief, placed his hand covered with the handkerchief, and holding the revolver in his right hand pocket. But then when he got to the point where the people were singled out in single file, he took his right hand from his pocket and held the hand covered with the handkerchief across his stomach until he reached the president, when he fired. He said he had not been stopped, he would have fired other shots. He said a great many other things about his previous history and condition in life, a general conversation.
Can you recall what he said on the subject of how long he had been thinking about this?
He said he had been thinking about killing the president for 3 or 4 days prior to the time of shooting, that he fully determined that he would kill the president the day before the shooting.
Can you recall anything he said on the subject of why he killed the president?
He said he did not believe in government, that he thought the president was a tyrant and should be removed. He said that the day before the shooting, when he saw the president in the grounds, that he thought that no one man should receive such services, and all the others regarded as a privilege to stand by and render services. He said he had for several years been studying the doctrines of anarchy, that he believed in no government, no marriage relation, and that he attended church for some time, but they talked nonsense, and he discontinued that.
He said, did he, that he did not believe in church or state?
Yes, and that he did not believe in the marriage relation, that he believed in free love. He gave the names of several papers which he had read, Polish names, which I cannot recall, 4 of them, and he mentioned one known as Free Society.
He mentioned some places that he had been to where he had heard these subjects discussed, didn't he?
Yes, places in Cleveland, Ohio. He said before he came to Buffalo, he'd been in Chicago. He said he'd been influenced by the teaching of Emma Goldman and another woman living near Cleveland, whose name I don't recall at this moment.
Was this talk that you had with the defendant conversational, in the sense that he went on and volunteered statements? Or was it in response to questions put by the district attorney?
At first, it was in response to questions put by the district attorney upon our arrival there. Later on...
Up to what time?
Oh, for the first half hour, he was answering questions that were put to him in a brief manner.
In monosyllables?
Oh, no, he talked just as I talk now.
You mean at first?
Yes, sir. When he did answer, he answered not in monosyllables, but gave direct, positive answers.
Did he appear to be in a state of mental excitement?
Did not so impress me.
Seemed to be cool and not excited or disturbed in any way?
He seemed to be disturbed by...
Well, that is the question I ask you.
But not mentally. He seemed to be suffering some pain. Constantly applied a handkerchief to the side of his face where he was struck in the Temple of Music, and complained that his eyes hurt him.
Did he have any marks on his face?
There were not any visible marks at that time. There were in the Temple of Music, but he had been washed, apparently.
What became of this weapon, pistol, that he used? Do you know about that?
Well, I only know from hearsay.
I have it here, Judge Lewis.
The handkerchief, do you know what became of that, of your own knowledge?
No, I last saw it at the time of the struggle.
How long were you there at police headquarters?
Just
How long
about
were you
2
there?
hours.
More than one person questioned him?
Yes, sir.
Who?
I asked him a few questions myself, and later in the evening, when the Inspector Donovan and another detective sergeant had what you may call a visit, in which he talked in a perfectly easy and conversational way, without replying to questions at times, he volunteered information.
What was his appearance there? Did he hold his head up any different from what he does now? Or was his head bowed?
When the district attorney and I first entered, he sat at the table with his head somewhat bowed and resting it upon his right hand, in which he held the handkerchief, and rubbed the right side of his face. And at first he did not look up promptly, but after a little while he looked up and soon took a lively interest in what was going on.
His talk was suppressed all the time?
It was not suppressed. And during one period of the talk, I asked him to make a brief statement for publication as to his reasons.
What did he say to that?
He said he would do it. I asked him to write it, and he started to write it, but his hand shook some, and he said he would dictate it to the reporter, pointing to Mr. Story, who sat at my left, and he did.
Are you using his exact language now?
It was either, let the reporter take what I say, or the reporter can write it down, something to that effect.
Did he tell the reporter what to write down?
Yes, sir.
Without interrogatories?
Yes, sir. I would prefer to refresh my recollection, and that if I could be permitted,
You may read the recorded statement on this paper. You recollect that that is the statement?
by looking at the statement, it refreshes my recollection so that I'm able to state what it was.
Go on.
Quote, I killed President McKinley because I'd done my duty. I didn't believe one man should have so much service and another man should have none. End of quote. This statement he signed.
Was there anything else he said to the reporter?
Not at that time.
That is all of his voluntary statement?
Oh no, this is the statement that he made for publication. He made, in addition to that, a statement of 2 hours duration.
What did he say about where he was born?
He said he was born in Detroit, Michigan.
And did he tell you how old he was?
He said he was 28 years old.
Did he tell you about his early life?
Yes?
If so, what?
He said that when he was quite young, his parents removed to Alpena, Michigan, that his boyhood was passed there, that afterward, when he was young, his mother died, that his father married again, that they removed to Cleveland, that he worked at one time as a blacksmith's helper, that subsequently he worked in the wire works in or near Cleveland, that his father lived on a farm near Warrensville, Ohio, that he'd lived on his father's farm for some time, but that he, as he put it, didn't like the style of his father and stepmother and left them. He was asked what he had been doing for the last 2 or 3 years. He said that he'd been working from time to time, that he'd been to Chicago just before coming to Buffalo, came directly from Chicago to Buffalo, arriving here on Saturday previous to the day of the shootings of the president. Well, this is in brief what I recall of it. He told about having attended a lecture in Cleveland at which Emma Goldman spoke.
That is all?
Mr. Rice, was he interrogated on the question as to whether or not he was alone in this matter?
Yes.
And what did he say on that subject?
He said that he was entirely alone, that nobody assisted him in any way, that he conceived the idea, planned the method and manner of carrying it out upon his own responsibility, that he understood the consequences of such an act and was willing to take his chances, and that he wanted a fair trial.
That is all.
I want to ask you one other question. You said that he made the statement that he was an anarchist. Was that it?
I don't think I made quite that statement.
Well, won't you repeat what you did say?
What he did say was that he didn't believe in any government, that he didn't believe in rulers. He thought that all rulers were tyrants and should be removed, and that he had done his duty in removing the president.
Then he said nothing about anarchy. You have used the expression in your evidence.
Yes. Well, the district attorney on several occasions used the word anarchy and talked with him about anarchists of note, mentioning them by name to him, asking him if he knew them. Whether he himself used that precise term or not, I wouldn't state positively.
Did he say anything upon the subject as to whether it was his duty, belonging, or owing allegiance or believing in that society to slay the heads of governments. Did he say anything upon that subject?
He did not put it on any ground of allegiance. He put it on the ground of belief, and he claimed that was the result of his own individual theorizing and reflection on the subject. Not that he used those terms, but that is the substance of it.
And that was his belief then?
That was it.
That is all.
Mr. Branch, you are employed at the Pan American Exposition, are you?
Yes, sir.
In the Temple of Music?
Yes, sir.
You had charge of the toilet rooms there, had you?
Yes, sir.
Were you there on this occasion when the shooting occurred?
Yes, sir.
Tell us what you saw of the shooting.
I saw this man when he got near me.
What man do you mean, sir?
The defendant.
The defendant?
Yes, sir. The defendant, he got near me, and I noticed a handkerchief in his hand. I seen him when he put his hand like this in his pocket and then came out, and his hand was like this, and he had his hand like this on his waist.
His right hand?
His right hand. And when he got near the president, it seemed as though he meant to shake hands with the president, and somehow, how he done it, I don't know exactly, but anyway, he looked as if he meant to shake hands with the president, but I saw a report and the fire. Then I saw the second report in the fire, and I saw the handkerchief on fire. And then after that, I saw the man when they began to get him. I heard someone say, "Oh, they have shot the president," like that.
You saw somebody grab this man just after he fired?
Yes, sir.
Who did you see grab him?
I saw one of the exposition guards grab after this man, and at this time, this artilleryman got near the man first.
You saw an artilleryman get near him?
Yes, sir. He got near him first, and at that time, the man was almost going down in the crowd, and one of the artillerymen grabbed him by the leg. At that time, the man was on the ground. Then I turned to see the president.
That is all you saw of the shooting?
That is all I saw of the shooting.
That is all.
Did you hear the president make any remark or say anything?
Well, not only just when he jumped.
When who jumped?
When the president jumped himself after the shot.
What do you mean?
The second fire, he jumped, you know, from one of them, what do you call those things there?
You mean he started back?
No, sir, he jumped from in front of one of those big tubs the trees were in.
Flower pots?
Yes, sir. He jumped from one and staggered over to the second one and then stood up.
That is, he staggered over to the right?
He staggered over to the right.
And then braced up again?
Yes, sir. Then he braced up again on the second one.
What did you hear him say?
He didn't say anything, only just, "Be easy with him, boys." That is all I heard him say.
What is that?
Be easy with him, boys.
Be easy with him, boys?
Yes, sir. Be easy with him, boys. That's all I heard him say.
You are superintendent of the Buffalo Police Department, are you, sir?
I am.
Were you present on the night of September 6th when this defendant was at headquarters?
I was.
Did you hear him make certain statements in reference to the shooting of the president?
I did.
Were there any threats made to him?
No, sir.
No offers of immunity of any kind?
No, sir.
Did he say anything about how long he'd been contemplating this act?
He said that he had in contemplation for some time, that he had planned the shooting, knew what he was going to do, had firmly made up his mind to kill the president, and went to the exposition grounds for that purpose.
Did he say why he did it?
I said, "Why did you shoot the president?" He said, "I only done my duty." I said, "Why?" And he turned his head and looked at me and he hesitated. I said, "Are you an anarchist?" He said, "Yes, sir." He said he did it because he thought it was right, that he believed he was doing right in killing the president.
Did he say anything about where he had gotten his anarchistic teachings or where he'd studied these subjects?
He said that he had taken up the subject of anarchy about 7 years ago. He said that when he was 21, he began to take up the subject of anarchy. The papers that he had read had been principally anarchist papers, socialist papers, and books relating to the subject of anarchy. He had also attended meetings in different places, heard various people talk upon the subject of anarchy, and and he believed what he had heard and what he had been told, and believed that he was right.
Did he say where, in what city he had been to meetings?
He said he had attended meetings in Cleveland. I think the most of the meetings he attended was in Cleveland at Superior Street, if I recollect right. But sometimes he used the word Ontario Street and sometimes Superior, but I think the number was 170 Superior Street.
Did he say who he had heard lecture at those places?
He had heard Emma Goldman talk. He had heard, well, there were some names, I think, a man by the name something like Zolozman, a Polish man, a man who edited a paper in Cleveland, and a number of other speakers. Those names were the ones I remember best. He also knew a man in Chicago by the name of Isaac, who published a paper called The Free Society. He had talked with this man upon the subject and read his paper. He told me that he made a special trip to Cleveland at one time to buy a paper that was published there, as he wished to read it.
What did he say, if anything, upon the subject of government?
Well, he did not believe in our form of government. He believed only in the government as taught by anarchists. He did not believe in government.
Believe in the church?
He had no belief in church. He had been a Roman Catholic, but it had nothing to do with the church in some time, because he did not believe their teachings.
Did he believe in marriage?
He did not believe in marriage. He was a free lover. And the Free Love Society, as I understand it, this was a free love society.
Did he say that when he shot the president, he intended to kill him?
Yes, he said that he went to the exposition grounds for the express purpose of killing McKinley, the president. That he knew him, that he had seen him before, and that when he shot, he knew he shot the president. He intended to kill him. That was in response to a question that he was asked why he had not discharged the other cartridges in his revolver, that he did not have the opportunity. On Saturday morning, a man named Nowak came to police headquarters and met the assistant superintendent, Mr. Kuzak. Said that he would like to see this man. He thought he knew him.
Were you present?
Not during that conversation.
Then I wouldn't give it.
I was going to lead up to this being brought up to me. That is all.
Were you present when Nowak saw the defendant?
Yes, sir.
Tell what you saw and heard at that time.
Nowak was brought into the private office of the superintendent of police and immediately recognized Czolgosz and said he knew him in Cleveland.
Who said so?
Nowak, Walter Nowak. He said he was employed in a printing office in Cleveland that Czolgosz was there, and they got him friendly, and that he knew his family.
He was talking there to who?
He was talking there principally to Czolgosz. He said to him, "You know me well, Czolgosz. I've always been a friend of yours. Why did you do this? Why did you commit this crime? Why have you committed an act that is going to bring disgrace upon the Polish race? Why have you committed this crime and that brings disgrace on your father, your mother, and your entire family?" The conversation was in that strain for some time, to which the defendant made no response, but simply smiled. Nowak asked him if he hadn't always been his friend. He said, "I don't know whether you have been a particular friend of mine or not."
That is what the defendant said?
That is what the defendant said. Nowak then said, "Haven't I taken you to the theater frequently?" "Oh yes, you have taken me to the theater on several occasions." "I don't know as that is any particular act of friendship," he said. "You and I belong to the same society, attended the meetings together, but it became so radical, the talk was so radical, I gave it up. I couldn't stand it. I wouldn't listen to it."
Who said that?
Nowak, talking to the prisoner. He says, "I'm a Republican. I am not a socialist or an anarchist. I am a Republican." The prisoner says, "Oh yes, you are a Republican for this." Nowak asked him, "What do you mean by that?"
That was addressed to the defendant?
That was addressed to the defendant. He said, I mean by that Nowak is a Republican for what there is in it, the money he can get out of it.
Do you remember, Superintendent, whether the defendant was asked at any time whether he desired to see a lawyer?
He asked if he wished to, he was asked if he wished to see a lawyer. He was asked if he had any friends he would like to see, if he wished to see his father or his mother.
What did he say on the question of the lawyer?
He said he didn't wish to see a lawyer, didn't need a lawyer, that he had no friends, and did not care to see his father or mother.
The people rest.
If Your Honor please, the defendant has no witnesses that he will call, so that the testimony is closed at the close of the testimony of the people. We are somewhat embarrassed and disappointed in the people's testimony closing at this point. I'm inclined to ask Your Honor to permit me to make some remarks to the jury in summing up the case. They will be, on my part, very brief. If Your Honor please, and gentlemen of the jury, the defendant's counsel appears here because under our system of jurisprudence, no man can be placed upon trial for a high crime of murder, the penalty of which under our system is death, without he had the assistance of counsel. The court has the power to appoint, and it is the duty of the counsel thus designated to appear in the case unless there can be made some reasonable excuse and succeed in being relieved of the duty. So that, you see, gentlemen, if any simple-minded, thoughtless person should entertain the notion for a moment that the counsel who appears in this case is doing something he ought not to do, that person is laboring under a very serious misapprehension as to the duties devolving upon a lawyer. It is shown beyond any peradventure of doubt that it was at the defendant's hand that the president was stricken down, and the only question that can be discussed or considered in this case is the question of whether that act was that of a sane person. If it was, then the defendant is guilty of the murder and must suffer the penalty. If it was an act of an insane man, then he is not guilty of murder but should be acquitted of that charge and would then be confined in a lunatic asylum. The law presumes that this man is innocent of the crime, and we start in investigating this case with the assumption that for some reason or other he is not responsible for the act which he performed on that day. That is one of the merciful provisions of the law in the civilized state, and it is a provision of law which you must consider and which you must permit to influence your minds until you are satisfied by the evidence in the case that doubt has been removed. Now, gentlemen, we have not been able to present any evidence upon our part. The defendant has even refused on almost every occasion to even talk with his counsel. He has not aided us. So that we have come here under, as I said to you, the designation of the court, to do what we can to determine this important question which is to be submitted to you. All that I can say to aid you is that every human being, yes, nearly certainly every human being, has a strong desire to live. Death is a specter that we all dislike to meet, and here this defendant, without having any animosity against our president, without any motive, so far as we can see, personal motive, we find him going into this building in the presence of these hundreds of people and committing an act which, if he was sane, must cause his death. How could a man of some mind perform such an act? Of course, the rabble in the street would say no matter whether he is insane or sane, he deserves to be killed at once. But the law says no. The law says consider all the circumstances and see whether the man was in his right mind or not. But one may say, why is it better that he should be convicted as a terror to others? That may be so in some regard, but gentlemen of the jury, if it could be, if it can be that you find this defendant was not responsible for the crime, for this act you would aid in uplifting a great cloud off the hearts and minds of the people of this country and of the world. If our beloved president had met with a railroad accident coming here to our city and been killed, we should all regret very much. We should mourn over the loss of such a just man, but our grief would not begin to compare with the grief that we now have, that he should be stricken down by an assassin, if such were the case. That adds poignancy to our grief. It does in my case to a very large extent. But if you could find that he met his fate by the act of an insane man, it would amount to the same as though he had met it accidentally, by some accident, and passed away under such circumstances. Now, gentlemen, I have said about all I care to say about this case. The President of the United States was a man for whom I had the very profoundest respect. I have watched his career from the time he entered Congress. It must be 20 or more years ago, until his last breath here in the city of Buffalo, and every act of the man, so far as I could judge, had been the act of one of the noblest men that God ever made. His policy, we care nothing about that so far as we may differ as to his policy, but his policy has always met with my profoundest admiration and every respect. I have known him not only as a statesman, but I have known him through the public press and otherwise as a citizen, a man of irreproachable character, a loving husband, a grand man in every respect that you could conceive of, and his death has been the saddest blow to me that has occurred in many years.
If the court please, and gentlemen of the jury, it is hardly possible for any man to stand before his fellow men and talk without the deepest emotion concerning the awful tragedy that has come upon the entire world. A remarkable exhibition of feelings has just been made to you by the distinguished jurist who was forced by his duty as a citizen, as a lawyer, and as a judge to carry out the absolute mandates of our law and to stand here before you and present the formal rights of this defendant. He says to you that here before you and present the formal rights of this defendant, he says to you there is no question that has been proved beyond any peradventure that this man was the instrument that caused the death of our beloved president. And he simply leaves you with the statement that if this man was mentally responsible, then he is fully and absolutely guilty of the crime of murder in the first degree. Gentlemen, we have had expeditious in the presentation of this case to you. Still, we have endeavored to present it to you with no indecent haste. We have endeavored to present to you all the essentials, all the material elements that go to make up the crime of murder in the first degree. We have shown you that our beloved president was shot on the 6th day of September. We have shown you the history of that wound and that he came to his death as a result of it.
It is incumbent upon the people to rebut or meet it with other evidence and remove all doubt in your minds, all reasonable doubt in your minds upon the subject.
I did not intend to ask Your Honor to charge anything before the counsel got up to request Your Honor to charge. But I now ask Your Honor to charge that if the jury are satisfied from all the evidence in the case at the time of the committing of this assault, he was laboring under such a defect of reason as not to know the quality of the act he was doing, or not to know the act was wrong, then he is not responsible and they must acquit him.
I so charge. I intended to make it very plain to the jury in the first place. Is that all, Judge Lewis?
That is all, sir.
You gentlemen may now retire with the officers.
I am now standing as the clerk of the court. We're all supposed to stand and stretch and mumble to each other to make a concession.
Gentlemen of the jury, now that you have returned from your deliberations, have you agreed upon a verdict?
We have.
How do you find?
Guilty of murder in the first degree as charged in the indictment.
Gentlemen, listen to your verdict as the court has recorded it. You say you find the defendant guilty of murder in the first degree as charged in the indictment. So say you all?
We do.
That ends your services, gentlemen of the jury, in connection with this case. You are excused until tomorrow morning at 11 o'clock.
Will the court fix the time of the sentence?
The statute gives the defense...
Sentence in the case of the people against Leon Czolgosz, Your Honor. Stand up, Mr. Czolgosz, please. Have you been convicted of any crime before this?
No, sir.
Have you any legal cause to show why sentence of the...
I would rather have this gentleman speak over here.
The clerk asks you if you have any legal cause to show why sentence should not be now pronounced against you. Do you understand?
No, sir.
He wants to know if you have any reason to tell the court why you should not now be sentenced. Say anything to the judge. Have you anything to say to the judge before sentence? Say yes if you have.
Yes.
Well, make your statement then.
Does he answer?
He says yes, he has something to say.
In that behalf, Czolgosz, what you have a right to say
I
is...
want to say this much.
Wait a moment.
Listen to the judge.
Relates explicitly to the subject in hand here at this time, and the legal causes which the law provides that you may claim in exempting you from having judgment pronounced against you at this time are defined by statute. The first is that you may claim that you were insane. The next, that you have good cause to offer either in arrest of the judgment about to be pronounced against you or for a new trial. Those are the grounds specified by statute upon which you have the right to speak at this time, and you are at perfect liberty to do so freely.
I have nothing to say about that.
He says, I have nothing to say about that.
Are you ready?
I am through, sir.
Nothing to say?
What is it?
What is your answer, Leon?
What is it in regard to...
If the court please, I think he ought to be permitted.
Have you anything to say in behalf of the prisoner, Judge Lewis?
I think he ought to be permitted to make a statement of exculpation of his family if the court will permit it.
Well, Judge Lewis, that depends, of course.
What does Your Honor say?
It will depend upon what the statement is.
Well, so far as the commission...
Have you anything to say in behalf of the defendant at this time?
Well, I have nothing to say within the definition Your Honor has read as to what we can say. But it seemed to me that in order that innocent people should not suffer by this defendant's crime, that the court should permit him to exculpate at least his father and brothers and sisters.
Certainly, if that is the object of any statement that he will make.
That is what he tells me.
Yes. Proceed, Czolgosz.
I would like to say this much, that the crime was committed by no one else but me. No one told me to do it, and I never told anybody to do it.
Your father and mother had nothing to do with it.
No, sir. Not only my father and mother, but there hasn't been anybody else had nothing to do with it.
What does he say?
He says no one had anything to do with the commission of this crime but himself. That his father or mother or no one else had anything to do with it. Mr. Czolgosz, did they know anything about it?
No, sir. They did not know nothing about it.
Does he desire to say anything further?
Anything further you want to say?
I never told nothing to nobody. I never told nothing of that kind. I never thought of that until a couple of days before I committed the crime.
He never told anybody of that he intended to commit the crime, nor did not intend to until a couple of days before its commission.
Anything further, Czolgosz?
No, sir.
Czolgosz, in taking the life of our beloved president, you committed a crime which shocked and outraged the moral sense of the civilized world. You have confessed your guilt, and after learning all that can at this time be learned of the facts and circumstances of the case, 12 good men have pronounced your confession true and have found you guilty of murder in the first degree. You declare, according to the testimony of credible witnesses, that no other person aided or abetted you in the commission of this terrible act. God grant it may be so. The penalty for the crime of which you stand convicted is fixed by statute, and it now becomes my duty to pronounce its judgment against you. The sentence of the court is that in the week beginning October 28, 1901, at the place, in the manner, and by the means prescribed by law, you suffer the punishment of death. Remove the prisoner.
All rise.
There's two.
The court is adjourned.
Would that all trials could be that quick.
Well, it wasn't that quick.
Would that this one were that quick?
Oh, that's right. I
Job
have
well
to-
done.
You might have wondered why Mr. Lewis was referred to as Judge Lewis, and that is because he had also served as a judge, as had Mr. Petty, who is now the district attorney, but he had been a judge as well. So we had two judges trying the case.
Just a postscript to all of this, you might wonder what happened next.
They called Clarence Darrow for a new trial.
And obviously what happened was the conviction. And upon returning to Auburn prison, he went to Auburn where prisoner Czolgosz asked the warden if this meant he would be transferred to Sing Sing to be electrocuted. That's where he wanted to be. And he seemed surprised to learn that Auburn had its own electric chair. Czolgosz was electrocuted by 3 jolts, each of 1,800 volts in Auburn prison on October 29, 1901, just 45 days after the victim's death. That's quick justice.
Yeah.
He was pronounced dead at 7:14. His brother asked for the body, and he was refused and informed that he would never be able to take it away and that the crowds of people would mob him. His last words were, "I killed the president because he was the enemy of the good people, the good working people. I am not sorry for my crime." As the prison guard strapped him into the chair, however, he did say through clenched teeth, "I am only sorry I could not get to see my father." And that ended Leon Czolgosz. Now, part of the story, somebody asked earlier, kind of this whole insanity defense, which became an issue in the Hinckley trial subsequently with President Reagan. So there was Charles Guiteau, going back a little bit, Garfield. That was really the first time in really the history of modern criminal jurisprudence where that idea of insanity came to play. It came up again here, as has other times, obviously. And it worked its way up to Hinckley, with Reagan. There's a whole history here, and this was part of it. There was a psychiatrist in Massachusetts who reviewed all of this trial shortly thereafter in 1901 and concluded that based on the evidence that he'd sought and found, and that, in fact, under then the definition of insanity, Leon Czolgosz fit that category, and that he should not have been convicted, but be that as it may. Also, one other thing, when he was sent from Buffalo, where the trial occurred, to Auburn, they had a hell of a time. The mob grabbed him, they got a hold of him, they beat the hell out of him. It took the wardens a significant amount of time just to get any control over him, and he damn near died because 300 people overwhelmed Auburn prison at that time when he came there for his residence. So, a great story. And also, the reason we got the transcript, by the way, was the Erie County Bar Association in 2001, on the 100th anniversary of the trial, actually had 2 days worth of this full trial. I mean, you saw a vignette of it, and to Alice O'Grady's credit, she took a very long trial into a very short one. So thank you, Alice.
Oh, yeah.
They spent 2 days, and the entire Erie County Bar Association was involved in that. Really how we got access to it. And Alice actually finessed getting the transcript and Word. That was great, so she was able to pull that off. So to all the actors, job well done. And is there any questions, by the way? Yeah.
I have a question. If somebody had analyzed this transcript and said that nowadays that would have been a insanity plea, don't you have to have Ralph or somebody
nowadays
that...
it would not be an insanity.
No, you
The
would have to
Norton
have
rule
professional...
states that all you need to do is understand the nature of the charges against you and be able to participate in your own defense.
No, but the
So
point
first of
is...
all, he would be considered sane today.
Okay, but when somebody else said could have been insanity, you're asking an average citizen who has no psychiatric training to make that decision without any professional witness saying, I mean, it just seems bizarre that anybody could have acquitted him on the insanity without any insanity defense. So that they, I mean, we couldn't have.
Well, obviously, part of it was Leon Czolgosz did not assist
didn't
counsel.
try,
He didn't do anything.
He didn't
just
want an insanity
capitulated.
defense.
So,
There was no insanity.
there was an issue of whether he wanted to just be a martyr for the cause, and that
Okay.
was part of the reason that his body was cremated. They put threw lime on it.
Acid.
Lime, I think. And anyways, just so there's no
So-
place where he could go.
It's hypothetical.
That was probably a very good move to move him to Auburn, because the warden at Auburn was an expert electric executioner, and his side job was traveling all over the eastern United States performing excellent executions.
How did you do this research?
I don't know where I'd read that, but
He just
I'm pretty
knows.
sure I'm right.
Knows.
By the way, what we saw on my video there was a shot at the very end of the electrocution. It was not the actual, but Edison in 1901, Thomas Edison had reenacted it to show, and he shot it from a distance, so that you didn't see the immediate reaction to it. But it was based on a description of what actually occurred. That's what that little piece of the movie is.
I have one more comment. Well, our son graduated from Allegheny, and I said, "Did you know that McKinley went to Allegheny? How come you never told me?" He says, "Because they never made a big deal of it, and I never knew it." So.
Well, the cow thing.
No, but I mean, the college didn't. He didn't know. That,
Well, the cafe down there is known as McKinley Brew or something like that. And so that piece about the cow going up, that's urban legend,
Of
but
course.
everybody heard it, and everybody thought, because it's typical of
it's
what
great.
Yeah.
I thought it was interesting that in the movie, they were trying to be historical and about the handkerchief that was over his hand, and they showed a blue handkerchief.
writing on it.
And, it wasn't blue, it was white. Clearly in the trial, it was
drunk.
a white handkerchief. And then I realized that these college kids who are doing this don't have white handkerchiefs. And it was that.
You're lucky if they have handkerchiefs.
Well, that was probably a neckerchief.
Joan?
Thank you, Greg, for all you've done.
Yeah.